is Anna Walker, and this morning I will be presenting on the Growing Readers program. I'm currently a third grade teacher at Tate Elementary School in Tate, Georgia. Tate Elementary School is a very special school. It was originally built by the Tate family, who were owners of the Marble Mines in Pickens County, Georgia. In the early 1900s, many of the children of the miners did not have a way to get to school that were in the county because most of them were in the main city of Jasper. So the Tate family built this school. Since then, it has been grandfathered in to the Pickens County school system, and the school still stands, and the county provides the teachers. Now, the mines are still in operation, and most of the students that we serve at Tate Elementary School have some connections to the mines, whether their parents or grandparents work there. Because of our location, many of our students live in generational poverty. Many of their families have worked in the mines for generations, and a lot of our families are single parent households. So our kiddos are dealing with all the aspects that a childhood in poverty brings. On top of that, we also have the opposite end of the socioeconomic spectrum, as there are two retirement communities that feed into Tate Elementary School's district. So we have the children of the families that were working in the mines, but then we also have children who are being raised by the grandparents in very wealthy, gated retirement communities. In my classroom, I have a mix of about everything. So I do have some students who receive ESOL accommodations for French and Swedish. I have students who have 504 plans for anxiety and ADHD, and I have students that have individualized education setting. I teach 3 reading classes every day to third grade students. My target group for this presentation was my homeroom class that I see first thing in the morning. For my project, I wanted to do something that aligns with my classroom, but also with our school improvement plan. So currently, our school improvement plan is to have all students reading on grade level. That is also the statewide initiative currently from our governor's office, is to have all students reading on grade level by the end of third grade. So that led me to select the Growing Readers program for this project as my intervention. This program is needed in my current setting. Many of my students are struggling with reading because they did not have a good foundation. Several of my students never went to preschool, and they are not in homes where they have an adult to work on reading skills with them. On top of that, my students were in a global pandemic, and in first grade in March is when they were sent home, and many of my students did not return to the classroom until August of this year. Some of them did a homeschool program provided through our county, whereas some of them were homeschooled by the adults that they live with. Regardless, we had many students come in who were not on grade level where they should have been for August of third grade. And the Growing Readers program is made for individual students. It is not looking at the class's data, it is looking at each student individually and what that student needs to get them caught up for grade level. When I began to research for this project, there was not much research on the Growing Readers program because it is so new. It began when Governor Kemp took office. But the main focus of the Growing Readers program is reading conferences. So what I did is I wanted to look at the research on reading conferences because I graduated from North Georgia in 2019, where I received a reading endorsement. And so I had training on reading conferences, but that was a few years ago. So I wanted to take a look at more recent data, but also not just in elementary school classrooms, because I think it's important that we work vertically. Yes, I'm in a third grade context right now, but I wanted to look at reading conferences in lower grades and higher grades to see what the research says about how reading conferences are beneficial in those classrooms. And it was very interesting how they were different. Some of the research that I read, teachers would receive professional development or professional learning at the beginning of the school year, and then they just implemented the program. I did some research that was more similar to the Growing Readers program, where they had a 2-year training program, where they had someone walk alongside them to help them with their reading conference skills, which is very similar to the Growing Readers program that I will explain later on. Across all of my research, though, every single classroom saw growth because it was about the individual student's reading skills. The teachers were able to sit down, look at what that child needed, and look at the skills that they needed a little more work on and the skills they had mastered. One thing I really enjoyed in my research was the teacher at the very beginning of her reading conferences, the first few, she only focused on taking everything in. She wanted to scaffold her learning for that student by taking in all of the information she could, giving them compliments as they read before she chose a strategy to implement, which is, again, very similar to the Growing Readers program. Now, some of the classrooms were different. Some teachers only chose to highlight one student, and some teachers chose to collect data on all of their students. In this project, I did collect data on most of my students. Some of my students are only with me for shared reading and not independent reading, but I did collect the data on most of them. So I was able to see growth across the board. After looking at all of my research, it was very clear that Growing Readers is a research-based program that would be very beneficial for my class and every single one of the students in there. The training for Growing Readers is a 2-year cohort model program. There are 35 reading specialists scattered throughout the state of Georgia, and luckily one of them is my academic coach at my school. So she is able to help train us. And we train in cohorts with other elementary schools in our county. Throughout the trainings, we will receive 4 2-day professional learning opportunities. And during that time, we're able to work with different reading teachers at our own school, but also other reading teachers that teach the same grade level as us at other schools in the county. This was very, very beneficial to see how they are implementing this in their classrooms, but also to see how things have changed with the implementation of this with COVID-19. This program was created, the training was created in 2018, 2019. So some of it is already outdated. It recommends letting students sit wherever they feel comfortable to read, but now with COVID guidelines, we've had to really step back and figure out what is the safest for our students. And that was one thing that we were able to share with other teachers in the county is we let our students sit under our desk. That way or their own desk. That way they are still within the seating chart, but they have more flexibility when they are reading. So just little things like that that made the training very special to be able to communicate with other reading teachers in our county. Now, this program helps teachers learn how to have beneficial, research-based reading conferences. Now, it wants you to call each student individually, and you can either go to where they are sitting, where they are reading, or call them over to your desk. And it wants you first to just listen to them read. Listen to them have conversations about the book, share with you what they are learning from the book. And as they are doing this, it encourages teachers to give them a compliment. And the first few conferences that they want teachers to have with the students are only compliment conferences. No strategies are to be taught, no corrections are to be made. It is only to get to know your student as a reader and to give them compliments. So that was so easy to me to make that connection with my research because so many of the articles that I read talked about the importance of getting to know your students as readers before giving them a strategy. Now, the next step for the reading conferences is to start giving them different strategies to work on. They want teachers to pick one area to work on and then find different strategies within that area. For example, I have one student who I could tell after our reading conferences, our first few compliment conferences, that he struggled with fluency. So what I did is I went through the different examples that the Growing Readers program gave us for fluency, and I found ones that he would connect to. Hey, there was one that said, read everything twice. The first time, focus on the words, and the second time, focus on how you talk. And him and I, we sat down and talked about this, and he's a baseball guy. And I said, friend, when you play baseball, when you're at practice, do you have to do the plays more than once to make sure you have them? And he said, oh yes, Miss Walker, we have to do the drill several times before we really are confident for the game. And I said, I do that when I'm reading. And the next part of the conference is the teacher gives an example. And I said, when I am reading, I come in here and I read it once to make sure I know all the words. And then I read it again to make sure that when I'm reading, I read how I talk. And then I modeled it for him. I went through and I read the same page he just read to me. First time just focusing on the words, and I intentionally read in a more robotic way, segmenting each of the words. And the second time I said, now I'm going to try this again, and I'm going to focus on how I talk. So I did that for him again. Then I asked him to read it a second time too. Now, when he was able to model this for me, he was very confident because he was able to go through it and know all the words because we had just read that page now for the fourth time. But it helped build his confidence. So I had him repeat to me, okay, what strategy are we working on? He said, well, we're going to do 1 word, 2 talk. And that was his strategy. So he was able to work on that until we met again. Now, these conferences only last about 5 minutes. And they are very beneficial to the students and for myself as a teacher because I'm able to see what my students need and how their progress is coming. While I am meeting with students, the other students are independently reading, and we are working on building up our stamina for independent reading. So how I do this in my classroom is I have a stopwatch on my Promethean board that starts on 0 and the time only goes up because I want the students to see what they are accomplishing. Now, I do have very competitive 3rd graders, and so in my classroom, I have the different teachers' names, and they compete to see which class can read the most independently every week. As an educator, I think it is very important what material is presented to students, whether that be the posters on our walls, the children's books in our classrooms, or the books that are being read during reading class. With many different curriculums, teachers do not have the ability to pull books that they do not agree with, or to add books that they feel would add variety and important lessons for the students. But with Growing Readers, there is that flexibility. Every one of my students receives a bag, and that is their library bag. And then they get to shop in my classroom to make their own personal library. What I do is after I conference with a student, I allow them to go pick out some books that are on their independent reading level. What I do is I look through my library to make sure that the books are filled with literacy-rich books that also lead to good conversations. One of my students, at the beginning of this year, he read a book about slavery for the first time, and it bothered him to the core. So we discussed it, and he had never heard of slavery, and he did not know that it was something that ever happened in our U.S. history. And so I suggested that he look through my library and see if he could find other books about slavery. So he did that. And then after a few weeks, he was still very upset by it. And he didn't understand how it ended or, how we moved out of it. And so then I was able to give him books about the civil rights movement. And this was all during the Growing Readers independent reading time. And it was able to fit into the curriculum to make a student more aware of a topic, but also the student had the freedom to read about what they were interested in exploring. And it allowed that student to be more passionate about his independent reading because he was seeing that he could learn from reading. If I look at this intervention from a more analytical standpoint, I would say that this intervention was successful. I measured every student's reading level the first or second week of school in August. And then I was able to also measure their reading level in November. And every single student had growth. My average growth was 3.4 reading levels. Now, that may not seem like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, that is getting them on track to be at or above grade level by the end of third grade. Students are expected to come in to third grade on an L or M reading level and then leave on an O reading level. So we have already covered almost an entire year's worth of growth in just a few months. So I'm very grateful for this program because it gave students the strategies that they needed, but also gave them the confidence that they needed, because many of these students have been reading at home. They've never read for a teacher, or they have not in a few years, and they have been missing that piece of confidence. So the Growing Readers program gave me time to just sit with my students and boost their confidence when it came to reading. Because at the beginning of the year, I heard a lot of students say, Miss Walker, I'm not a good reader. Oh, I'm so sorry I messed up. And I said, no, we are learning. And mistakes help us get there. And so in my classroom, we always talk about every single one of us is reading royalty. And we are just making sure that we have our crowns on as we read. And this program gave us the flexibility to have conversations and to learn strategies to build up our confidence, but also build up different skills. So analytically, yes, I would recommend this program to any teacher. And then just looking at it from a teacher's standpoint of seeing the confidence go up for my students and how happy they are to read, I would wholeheartedly recommend this program to be implemented not just in kindergarten through third grade, but kindergarten through 12. Some of my research was about high school students doing reading and writing conferences, and in every setting, it was successful to students. Because students crave that one-on-one attention from their teacher or from any adult in their life to be able to learn a strategy one-on-one that is catered to their needs and their level. Now, the Growing Readers program did take some work at the beginning because it was hard to implement a program that required reading stamina, especially for a group of kiddos who have been virtual learners for about a year and a half. They weren't used to having to be in a classroom all day, and they definitely were not used to having to sit down in one space and read independently. And it took some work, but I was not alone on my struggle bus. Through the CARES Act that is provided through the federal government, our school brought in parapros for third grade, which allowed me to have another teacher in the classroom. My parapro is a retired educator, and so he helps out by helping with the classroom management piece so I can have those reading conferences. And I am extremely lucky to have him as a parapro because he is now receiving the Growing Readers training. So hopefully by January, we will both be able to implement reading conferences in my classroom. I would say though that first month, that is the weakness of this program because there's not a lot of material to help teachers get it going. But our trainings did allow us to talk as teams, to talk as grade levels and figure out, okay, how are we going to do this? And that is where I got the idea of having a stopwatch on the board to showing them the progress they have made. That's where we got the idea of, okay, let's let the students sit under their desk because it still fits with their COVID seating charts. So it was nice to sit with other teachers and say, okay, here are the weaknesses I see. how are we going to fix them? So I will say that Growing Readers, it has a weakness, but it works to fill in the gaps. Based on my experience with Growing Readers for my classroom, I would recommend that they continue this because it allows every student to get what they need for reading. I had one student come into my classroom on a T reading level. This student was ready to go to middle school with their reading level. Meanwhile, I had another student come in on an E reading level, and we were still working on mastering our letter sounds. But through the Growing Readers program, I'm able to work with both of those students on their level and on strategies that they need to be successful, which is so rare to find with curriculum, especially in a public school setting. So I was very grateful that I was given that flexibility.